I closed the notebook and laughed. Too loudly, too quickly, the way people laugh when they're trying to shove uneasiness back down their throat. The sound echoed strangely in the cabin, bouncing off the wooden beams as if the house wasn't used to laughter. Or maybe it didn't like it. I set the notebook on the coffee table and leaned back in the creaking armchair. The fire cracked in the hearth, giving off a warm glow that fell just short of comforting. Outside, the forest had gone almost black. Night came fast in the mountains, swallowing the world whole. Rules. Ridiculous. Still, I caught myself glancing toward the curtains, making sure they were drawn tight. Not because I believed in any of this, I told myself, but because isolated cabins and darkness mess with the mind. Anyone would feel that. I picked the notebook back up, flipping through the pages again. People had scribbled notes in the margins, short lines, half sentences, some of them scratched out. One said simply, "Don't trust the quiet." Another, "The woods, remember." A longer note caught my eye, written in desperate, slanted writing that trailed off into a tear in the paper. "If you see her, pretend you didn't." A chill tightened along the back of my neck. I snapped the notebook shut. "This is stupid," I muttered. But I still found myself walking to the back door and turning the deadbolt. Then the front. It was instinct more than fear, I told myself. Habit, preparedness. Nothing to do with the rules that were definitely not starting to sink their teeth into my imagination. The scratching started around midnight, soft at first, like a branch brushing against the wall. Wind, I thought, just wind. Except the trees were too far from the cabin to reach it. I knew that because I had noticed earlier while unloading my gear. Tall pines swayed well beyond the porch, beyond the stone circle I still couldn't see. The scratching came again, louder this time, dragging along the boards beneath the back window. I froze, breath held tight in my chest, listening so hard my ears ached. Something shifted outside, slow, deliberate. Then, Blake! My name, spoken in a whisper that didn't belong to any voice I recognized. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, and the only thing I could think was, Rule 4, don't answer if you hear your name called from the forest. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle locked tight, listening to the darkness press against the cabin walls. The whisper didn't come again, not immediately, but the silence that followed felt heavier than sound, as if the forest itself were waiting for me to make a mistake. I backed away from the window, slow and careful, not wanting the floorboards to creak. Rule 4 throbbed in my mind like a heartbeat. Don't answer if you hear your name called from the forest. Not might hear, not in case. If, as though it happened often enough that no one bothered to doubt it anymore. I grabbed the notebook from the table and flipped through to the page with the rules. A small smear of red ink stained the corner. Had that been there before? I couldn't remember. Maybe it was just old ink, faded to rust. The scratching started again, this time on the opposite side of the cabin. Something was circling. I backed away until the couch hit the back of my legs. I sank into it and held the notebook tight, the leather warm from my hands. The fire popped softly behind me, throwing flickering orange light across the room. I didn't dare blow it out. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour. At some point, the scratching stopped. The forest quieted. The world held its breath. I should have stayed inside. I should have listened to every instinct screaming at me to sit still, wait for daylight, and pretend none of this ever happened. But instead, I got up. Curiosity sharpened my fear, cutting through caution. I moved toward the back window and pinched the curtain open just an inch enough to see the tree line, nothing more. Moonlight caught on something pale between the trees. I blinked, leaning closer. It wasn't an animal, not any animal I'd ever seen. It stood still, too still, like a figure waiting for a cue to move. Its outline was wrong, thin, where it should have been broad, tall in a way that made my stomach knot. The moment I saw it, it stepped backward into the dark, vanishing without a sound. The wind rustled through the pines. The night returned to pretending it was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears. I shut the curtains, locked the back door again even though it was already locked. Sat down, staring into the fire until my eyes burned. I didn't sleep, not even for a second, because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Savannah hadn't given me a warning. She'd given me a countdown. By dawn, exhaustion clung to me like frost, but the sunlight leaking through the blinds offered a kind of fragile courage. Daylight always lies. It makes you believe the night's horrors were tricks of the mind. Shadows become trees again, whispers dissolve into wind, but the memory of that figure in the woods that stayed sharp. I stepped outside with my camera bag slung over my shoulder, more for comfort than for work. The morning air carried the cold bite of altitude, and the forest smelled clean pine, damp earth, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. I walked around the side of the cabin, following a narrow path between the trees. That's when I saw it. It sat in a clearing no larger than a living room, ringed by ancient pines whose branches seemed to bend inward as though they were keeping watch. 12 stones, each the height of my knee, arranged in an almost perfect circle. Some were cracked, some stained. All of them looked older than the cabin, older than memory. I raised my camera out of reflex. My finger hovered over the shutter. Rule 1 slammed into my mind with sudden clarity. Never photograph the stone circle behind the cabin! I lowered the camera, heart thudding. The rule didn't say why. None of them did. The ambiguity was worse. It forced my imagination to fill in the blanks, and my imagination had always been too active for its own good. I crouched beside one of the stones. Thin grooves carved across the surface formed shapes I didn't recognize, symbols that twisted in a way the eye had trouble following. The patterns looked almost deliberate, like handwriting in a language older than the soil. A breeze passed through the clearing. Every muscle in my body tensed, because the wind carried voices. Not words, just the cadence of speech, like someone whispering from behind closed doors. The hairs on my arms lifted. My breath fogged in front of me despite the rising sun. I stood quickly, backing away from the circle. The whispering stopped. The clearing went dead silent. Birds usually sang at this hour. I heard none. When I turned to leave, I froze. Footprints, fresh ones, leading from the cabin toward the circle. Not mine. These were larger, deeper, and spaced as though whoever made them moved with a strange, loping gait. They stopped exactly at the edge of the stones, and nowhere else. No return tracks, no trail into the woods, just vanished. A cold thought pushed into my mind. Something had been standing here last night, watching, waiting, and whatever it was, it had stepped into the circle. I didn't realize I was shaking until I fumbled the cabin door latch. My fingers felt stiff, numb, like the cold from the clearing had seeped into my bones and refused to thaw. When I finally got inside, I slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass panes. The lock clicked under my thumb, then the deadbolt, then the chain. I stood there for a long moment, forehead resting against the wood, trying to breathe normally. Even in daylight, the cabin felt different now, smaller, like the walls were leaning in. I kept seeing those footprints in my mind, how they just stopped, as if the thing making them had stepped out of the world entirely. I needed answers. Real answers. Not strange warnings, not half-scribbled rules, not whispers in the wind. The notebook. Maybe there was something I missed. I set it on the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the worn leather. When I untied the string and flipped it open, a thin puff of dust lifted into the air. The first page looked the same as before, the 8 rules, each in different handwriting. But when I turned to the next page, I noticed something I hadn't the night before. A seam. A subtle roughness near the binding. Pages had been torn out, not 1 or 2, several, maybe a dozen. The edges were jagged, ripped in a hurry. I ran my fingers along them and felt a faint indent, like the pressure of someone gripping the paper too tightly as they tore it free. What had they written that someone wanted gone? On the next intact page, a short message sat alone in the middle. "Don't stay here for long! The rules buy you time! Nothing more!" Underneath, faint pencil marks lingered where someone had erased something vigorously. I tilted the notebook toward the light. A few words resurfaced. Can't escape the circle. She comes at dusk. Ah, the forest is full of copies. Copies? Copies of what? A chill crawled up my spine. I flipped faster now, scanning each page. Most were filled with fragmented warnings, crude drawings and dates, some crossed out, others circled. But the very last written entry made my heart drop. It was new, too new. Written in shaky handwriting from last night's ink. It followed me to the window. Do not look at its face. My breath stopped. Because below those words, pressed faintly into the paper as if someone wrote in the dark without seeing, was another line. "Blake, you need to leave." I staggered back from the table. None of the previous guests could have written that. They didn't know my name. I stared at the notebook as though it might start writing on its own again. My name, carved into the page by a hand I'd never seen, sat there like a bruise. The room felt smaller, heavier, the air thinning with every second I kept looking at those letters. Eventually, I forced myself to close the notebook. The leather cover slapped shut too loudly in the quiet cabin. I needed to get outside. I needed fresh air. I needed to feel like the world hadn't folded itself into something unnatural overnight. But when I stepped onto the back porch, the forest greeted me with an unsettling stillness. No birds, no insects, not even the wind moving through the pines. It was a silence too complete to be natural. I lowered myself onto the porch steps, elbows on my knees, hands pressed against my face. I told myself I'd leave. Maybe not now, maybe after grabbing my gear, but soon. The trip wasn't worth whatever was happening here. No photograph was. I should have trusted that impulse, because when I lifted my head, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Across the clearing beyond the tree line, something moved. It stepped out just enough for me to see a silhouette, tall, narrow, limbs too long, posture too still. My chest tightened as memories from last night surged forward, a pale shape between trees, a whisper of my name scratching along the walls. This figure looked exactly the same, but no, there was something worse. Watching. I stood slowly, careful not to make sudden noise. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. It simply waited, head angled ever so slightly to the side like it was curious. A cloud drifted across the sun, dimming the clearing, and in that shift of shadow, the figure took one step forward. My breath caught. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me backward toward the door. My hand fumbled behind me for the knob. The figure stepped again and again, but it didn't walk. It slid smooth, silent, as though the ground had no friction. My fingers finally closed around the doorknob. I shoved myself inside and locked the door in a single motion, chest heaving. From the window I heard it, not scratching. Something worse. A slow, deliberate tap. 3 times. Then a voice, my voice mimicking me perfectly, "Let me in." Every hair on my body lifted. Rule 4 wasn't a warning, it was a promise. I'd backed away from the window, keeping my eyes fixed on the glass as though the thing outside might try to slip through at the moment I looked away. My own voice, my exact voice, still echoed through the cabin, replaying the same 3 words like a broken recording. "Let me in! Not desperate, not angry, just patient." As though it already knew the ending. I grabbed the fireplace poker, gripping the cold metal until my knuckles blanched. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. Every instinct screamed to run, but the rules said nothing about running. They only told me what not to do. And right now, it said nothing about looking. Slowly, I edged toward the window. The tapping had stopped. The voice had stopped. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. When I finally peeked through the narrow gap in the curtains, it was gone. Every muscle in my body sagged with a mix of relief and dread. Nothing that moved like that simply left. It was waiting, watching, choosing a better angle. I pulled the curtain shut and stepped away. That's when I noticed something else, something I should have seen earlier. More footprints. In the dirt just a few feet from the cabin wall, leading from the trees to the window, and then branching off into several directions. Like whatever approached me outside had split, multiplied, or mirrored itself. Copies. The erased line in the notebook came rushing back. The forest is full of copies. Copies of me? Copies of others who stayed here? Copies of something older? Every possibility made my stomach churn. I retreated to the living room, flipping the notebook open again with shaking hands. Pages fluttered like nervous wings. A small slip of paper I hadn't noticed before slid out and drifted to the floor. A torn photo. Not a full image, just a corner. It showed part of the cabin porch and the shadow of a person standing on it. The shadow's head was turned sharply, too sharply, as if the neck had bent into an angle no human could manage. On the back, in smeared pencil, "Don't let them see your face." I swallowed hard, nearly choking on my own breath. The rules were incomplete, the warnings scattered, the pages missing, but they all hinted at one truth. Those things in the forest were just watching me. They were studying me, learning me, adapting to me, and the longer I stayed here, the more I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just being hunted, I was being replicated. The rest of the day passed in a haze of dread. I paced the cabin, checking every door and window twice, then again. Each time I told myself it was the last. Each time I found myself repeating the ritual without even realizing it. Anything to avoid thinking about the copies. By late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the ridge, turning the sky a bruised purple. The forest absorbed the light greedily, swallowing the clearing in shadow. Night wasn't here yet, but it was close enough that I felt the rules crawling back into my mind, whispering warnings. Stay out of the woods between sunset and sunrise. Cover all mirrors after dark. I moved from room to room, draping towels over the bathroom mirror, the hallway mirror, the small decorative one in the bedroom. Each reflective surface felt like a mouth waiting to open. My skin prickled every time my own face disappeared beneath the cloth, like I wasn't sure it would still be mine if I looked again. By the time the last sliver of daylight died, the cabin was dim and claustrophobic. The fire burned low, crackling softly. I lit a few candles, not wanting total darkness, but not wanting bright light either. Something told me bright light made it easier for things to see in. Night settled with grim finality, and almost immediately, the voices began. At first, they were faint like conversation drifting up from a floor below, too muted to make out words. I froze in the living room, listening. The sound came from the woods, rising and falling in rhythm like a group whispering around a campfire. Then the whispers shifted. Closer, focused, dozens of voices, maybe more. They weren't speaking words, not fully. Each fragment rolled through the trees like breath struggling to form language. Look, kum, utzi ide, keep liayisning. I pressed my hands over my ears, heart pounding. It didn't help. The voices slipped through my palms like smoke, curling into my skull. One voice pushed forward among the others, stronger, clearer, my voice. Blake. Look out the window. My stomach dropped. Rule 4 hammered through my mind like a fist. Don't answer if you hear your name called from the forest. But it didn't tell me what to do when the voice became me. I sank to the floor, back against the couch, forcing my eyes shut. The whispers grew more frantic, more insistent, like a crowd gathered just outside the walls, urging me to misstep. Then, a knock at the door, slow, deliberate, followed by my voice again, calm and terrifying. Open the door, Blake. I found something you lost. I didn't move. Not when the knocking came again. Not when it grew louder, more rhythmic, like knuckles dragging across the wood in a slow, taunting pattern. My own voice, my perfect voice, spoke again from the other side of the door. Blake, open up! You dropped something earlier! I pressed myself tighter against the couch, fingers digging into the fabric so hard it hurt. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out everything except the steady, patient tapping. The door handle twitched. Just once, just enough to test it. Even with my eyes squeezed shut, I felt the shift in the room, the sudden pressure change, the sense of something enormous leaning close. The voice outside dropped lower, almost playful. Why are you hiding from yourself? A shiver ran across my shoulders like icy fingertips. I forced myself to breathe, slow and shallow. If I panicked, I'd make noise. If I made noise, it would know exactly where I was. The tapping stopped. Silence thickened, heavy as wet soil. I waited, counted the seconds in my head, and after what felt like an entire hour but was probably 30 seconds, I risked opening my eyes. The cabin looked unchanged. The candle still flickered. The fire glowed faintly. And then... crunch. Snow? No. Leaves. Dry leaves being crushed underfoot. It was moving around the cabin. I crawled across the floor on my hands and knees until I reached the far wall, putting as much distance as I could between myself and the doors and windows. The voices outside swelled again, dozens of layered, gibbering tones, but one cut through sharper than the others. Mine! Blake! I'm right here! Even through the curtains I saw the shape, tall, thin, head tilted at that unnatural angle, neck bent like a hinge instead of bone. It whispered my name again, but this time it wasn't mocking, it was hungry. The curtain shifted faintly as if touched. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. Then the thing traced its fingers down the window, each movement slow, deliberate, curious. The sound it made was soft but unmistakable, a faint squeal of skin sliding across cold glass. My voice spoke from behind the curtain one last time. Let me see your face. The cabin went dead still. Then another voice answered. Not mine, not human, from deeper in the woods, not yet. And the thing at the window froze. The voice from the woods, low, resonant, inhuman, rolled through the trees like distant thunder. The creature at my window went completely still, its outline rigid behind the curtain, as though frozen mid-breath. For a heartbeat, I wasn't sure if it had vanished or was simply waiting for permission to move again. Then, slowly, mechanically, it stepped back, one soft thud of a foot, then another, and another. Retreating, but not leaving. I crawled across the living room floor until I reached the fireplace, the warm stone grounding me for a moment. My lungs felt too small. I kept expecting the door to burst open for the thing wearing my voice to slide inside and drag me out. But instead, the forest fell quiet, not peaceful, wrong, like the woods were holding their breath, listening. That deeper voice still echoed in my skull. Not yet. I reached for the poker again, though I doubted metal would do anything. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold it. Candlelight flickered against the walls, shadows stretching long and thin, and I felt the same sensation I'd felt the first night, the sense of being watched from every angle. The notebook lay on the floor where I'd dropped it earlier, pages fanned open. I grabbed it like a lifeline and skimmed frantically through the entries. Some warnings clicked together now. Some suddenly made sense. One line scrawled in jagged ink stood out. There is a leader, a voice the others obey. If you hear it, you're already marked. Marked. The word hit me like a punch. My throat tightened. At the bottom of the same page, smaller writing looped across the margin. The copies mimic what they see. But the one in the woods, it sees everything. My stomach dropped. Everything. A sudden slam against the far wall jolted me upright, not at the window or the door farther back. Near the bedroom, I spun, heart hammering. Then another slam. Floorboards groaned. Something heavy moved in the hallway. I backed toward the front door, every instinct screaming to run. Rules be damned. I didn't care about sunrise anymore. I didn't care about what I was supposed to do. I needed to get out. But as I reached for the deadbolt, a whisper slipped under the door. Soft, close, familiar. "Blake, she's coming." My blood turned to ice. Before I could retreat, the large shape in the hallway stepped into view. Tall, wrong-shaped, its limbs bending like wet branches. But it wasn't facing me. It was crouching, as if bowing. Outside, the trees shifted with a sound like thousands of dry leaves being crushed all at once. Something vast was approaching, something the copies obeyed, something that now knew my name. The calm before the storm is always the most terrifying. That's what I realized as I crouched behind the couch, clutching the poker like it was a talisman. The hallway outside my bedroom door was quiet. Too quiet. Every creak of the cabin floor sounded like an explosion in the dead air. I could feel it watching, the presence outside, the one the copies obeyed. And then I remembered the last rule, the one written in shaky red ink. If red handprints appear on any windows, leave immediately and never return. My gaze flicked toward the back window and I froze. Red handprints streaked across the glass. Fresh, glowing faintly in the dim candlelight. Fingers pressed flat, smeared downward. They weren't just on the outside. Some were faintly visible inside too, as if pressed from the other side, leaving an imprint in the air itself. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. My mind was already screaming instructions I didn't trust. Rule 8 didn't say what happens if you don't leave in time, only that you had to leave. But seeing the handprints, it was a threat, a promise, a countdown, and then I heard it. Not my voice this time, a wet, slithering sound like claws dragging across the wood. From every window, every wall, the cabin groaned, the candles flickered violently, shadows warped across the walls, lengthening and twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. Something tapped at the front door, slow, patient, waiting. I grabbed the notebook and the camera bag, thinking maybe I could just escape. I didn't know where. The forest outside had become a gray, moving wall of shapes and voices. I could hear them whispering all around me, calling my name, but not just my name. Others, too, in a chorus of shrill, panicked voices. Maybe previous guests, maybe copies. I ran for the door, sliding it open slowly. The handprints weren't there anymore. Only the shadows of trees, bent and alive, pressed close as if the forest itself leaned toward the cabin. A figure moved just beyond the tree line. The copies, dozens of them, emerged like they had been waiting. Some crouched low, some loomed tall, all wearing distorted versions of human faces. Faces that could only belong to the people who had come before me. And in the center of them stood the leader. The one the notebook warned about. Its body was thin, limbs bending at impossible angles, head tilted unnaturally. But the face, it was mine, or rather a perfect imitation of mine, grinning like it had known me my entire life. The forest seemed to inhale around me. The wind died. Silence pressed against my ears so hard it was painful. And then, faintly, I heard Savannah's voice carried on the air like a warning. "Leave, now!" The moment I stepped outside the cabin, the woods felt different, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The air pressed against me in thick, humid waves, as if the forest were inhaling and exhaling around my body. Each tree stood unnaturally still, their branches raised like skeletal arms, frozen mid-gesture. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. Waiting for me! The copies did not rush me, didn't scream, didn't chase. They simply watched with identical, unblinking faces, my face curved into that unnatural smile, their heads tilted at the same angle, necks bending slightly too far like marionettes held by a single string. Behind them, deeper in the woods, I could see the faint red glow of handprints appearing and disappearing on the trunks of trees. A map, a warning, a trap. I couldn't tell. The figure wearing my face stepped forward. Every instinct I had told me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. It wasn't fear. It was pressure, a weight in the air that pushed back when I tried to move. The creature was controlling the environment itself, like the forest bowed to its presence. When it spoke, its voice came out layered, mine on top, but underneath it were dozens of others, men and women, whispering in overlapping tones. "You stayed too long." My throat tightened. "What do you want?" Its grin widened until the skin around its mouth cracked. No blood, just the sound of stretching, dry bark splitting. The copies behind it leaned forward in perfect synchronization like bending reeds. "You should have left when the marks appeared," it said, lifting its hand. Its fingers were longer than mine, much longer. The nails curved slightly, sharp like claws. "The forest marks what belongs to it." A ripple passed through the trees, leaves trembling despite the still air. Slowly, agonizingly slow. The creature raised its other hand and pressed its palm against a nearby tree trunk. A fresh red handprint bloomed under its skin like a spreading stain. The forest groaned. That sound still haunts me. It wasn't wood bending. It was something organic waking up. The ground vibrated. Not enough to knock me down, but enough to let me feel something huge shifting beneath the surface. Roots slithered under the soil, weaving around my boots like snakes. "Leave," the creature whispered. But then its grin sharpened. "Or join them." Behind it, dozens of copies stepped out from between the trees, some broken, some crawling, some standing too tall, faces half-formed, as if molded from clay and abandoned halfway. "Former guests! Former victims! Former humans!" I took a step back toward the cabin. The forest took a step forward. I stumbled backward toward the cabin, lungs burning, heart hammering in my chest like a drum of panic. The copies didn't pursue me in the traditional sense. They flowed through the forest, spreading silently like shadows, bending toward a source of light. Every step I took, they mirrored, stepping around trees, rising up behind them, shaping the forest to their will. I felt watched from every direction. From above, below. Even the soil seemed aware of me. I threw the cabin door open and slammed it behind me, throwing the deadbolt and chain in place. My palms were slick with sweat. I could hear the soft scratching at the windows, the faint dragging of nails across wood. It wasn't just outside anymore, it was everywhere. The forest, the cabin, the very air seemed to carry a pulse of warning, a rhythm I could feel under my skin. I grabbed the notebook from the table, flipping to the last few pages. They were smeared with red ink now, almost alive, as if something had scrawled over the words while I was outside. I could just make out phrases in frantic, hurried handwriting. Do not answer. Do not look. Do not sleep. Do not leave immediately. The last rule jumped off the page in large, jagged letters. IF red, handprints appear. Leave immediately and never return. I glanced at the back window. Faint crimson marks had spread across the glass again, thicker than before, dripping down like blood in slow motion. The moment I noticed them, the scratching became louder, closer, more insistent. The copies pressed against the edges of the porch, faces straining to see inside. One raised a hand, pointed directly at me. My reflection in the glass wavered and shifted, almost human, almost mine, but wrong. My stomach dropped. I understood now. The rules were just guidelines. They were lifelines. They were the difference between surviving and joining them. Becoming one of the copies. Becoming part of the forest. Part of something I couldn't comprehend. I packed what I could grab, camera, backpack, some supplies. My fingers shook. I didn't stop to consider where I'd go. Anywhere was better than here. As I stepped outside, the wind screamed through the pines, carrying voices from every direction. My own voice mixed with dozens of others, echoes of every person who had ever stayed in this cabin. Whispers screamed in my head, and I stumbled over tree roots, heart thundering. I glanced back once. The cabin stood silent, deceptively normal from a distance, but the red handprints glowed faintly in the shadowed doorway, as though the house itself was breathing, marking its claim. Rule 8 had not been a warning, it was a countdown, and I was running out of time. I ran without thinking, stumbling over the tangled roots and rocks as the forest seemed to shift beneath my feet. Every step I took, the copies multiplied. Shadows rose and bent, shapes slithering just beyond sight, almost human but impossibly wrong. The deeper I went, the darker it became. Not because the sun had set, it was the forest itself folding in on me, swallowing light, air, and time. Branches clawed at my jacket, snagged my hair, and tugged me back, as if the woods were alive with intent. I could hear them behind me, dozens of whispers, hundreds of feet brushing against the underbrush, echoing my name. The voice of the leader, the one that commanded them, rippled through the trees in layered tones. You cannot leave. The sound wasn't just heard, it vibrated through my chest, in my bones, as though the forest was reshaping me with each word. I stumbled into a clearing and froze. The stone circle from before glowed faintly in the moonlight, the 12 stones casting twisted shadows that danced like living things. Footprints littered the dirt around the ring, copies, originals, it was impossible to tell. They all converged toward the center where the leader crouched, waiting. My shadow stretched across the stones like a tether, pulling me closer even as I fought. I knew I shouldn't go. The rules screamed at me. Never photograph the circle. Stay out of the woods after dark. Cover mirrors. Don't answer your name. I had broken all of them, and now the punishment had come. I turned to run, and a figure stepped in front of me. Not one of the copies, not the leader. Something else. Its form shimmered, changing with each blink, wearing fragments of human faces and bodies from the past, stitched together in the wrong order, limbs bent at impossible angles, eyes blinked where cheeks should be. It grinned, my grin. "You've seen too much," it said, voice a chorus of everyone lost here. "And now you belong." My stomach dropped. I ran anyway, heedless. Every direction I turned, more copies rose from the shadows, some running, some crawling, some hanging in midair, bodies bent like trees. The forest pulsed, roots writhing underfoot, branches scraping the sky, twisting. I screamed, and the sound was copied, layered, distorted, echoing back at me. Every time I tripped, something caught me and shoved me forward, deeper into the circle. The stone circle loomed before me, pale in the moonlight. The leader waited at the center. The others closed in around the edge. My chest heaved. My mind raced. Every instinct screamed, "Leave! Leave now!" But the forest wanted me to see. And I did. I stumbled into the stone circle, breath heaving, limbs trembling. The forest seemed to pull itself away, leaving a dome of unnatural stillness around me. The air was thick, almost viscous, pressing against my lungs. The copies had formed a perimeter, their distorted faces glowing faintly in the pale moonlight. They didn't move, didn't speak, but their presence was unbearable, as if the very ground beneath me recognized my fear. The leader stood at the center, its limbs bending impossibly, head tilted in that impossible angle. My reflection shimmered across its face in fragments, my own expression twisted into a monstrous grin. It raised one hand, long fingers arching toward me. A faint pulse radiated from it, vibrating through my chest. My stomach turned. Every nerve screamed to run, but the circle's energy pinned me to the spot. I realized with a shiver the stones weren't just boundaries. They were anchors holding me here, feeding the forest, feeding them. I wanted to fight, to swing the poker, to run. But instinct had drained me of strength. I sank to my knees, feeling the cold dirt under my hands, eyes locked on the leader. It whispered my name, soft, patient, intimate. My voice came out when I tried to speak, but it wasn't my own. Layered over it were the voices of the lost, crying, laughing, screaming, begging. Each syllable hammered into my skull like nails. The other copies shifted as one, faces distorted further. Limbs bent, twisted. Shadows writhed across the ground, forming shapes I could barely recognize, twisting animals, human masks, impossible angles. A low chanting rose from somewhere deep in the circle. I couldn't locate the sound, yet it surrounded me, pressing closer. Then the leader stepped toward me. The ground under its foot didn't touch the soil. It hovered slightly, as if gravity itself bent to it. I realized I could not escape by leaving the circle. The stones, the forest, the copies, they were all one, a single organism, and I was trapped at its heart. One hand hovered inches from my chest. My body screamed to recoil, but I stayed frozen, terrified to move. The leader leaned close. I could feel the chill of its skin, smell the decay and metal beneath the forest's breath. Its whispered words slithered into my ears. "You will remember, and then you will serve." A flash of movement, my own image standing behind the leader, pressed into the forest's edge, mirroring my fear. A copy, perfect, ready. The ground trembled, the stones pulsed. Roots began rising, coiling, tightening. The circle had begun to consume, and in that moment I realized the forest didn't want me gone. It wanted me to stay. It wanted me to become part of it. I had no choice. The roots wrapped around my ankles first, cold, slick, pulsing with something that felt disturbingly alive. They wound up my legs like serpents, tightening every time I struggled. Panic surged through my chest. I clawed at the dirt, grasping for anything, sticks, stones, breath. But the circle held me fast. The chanting around me shifted, deepened, grew into something almost melodic, as though the forest itself was humming. The leader loomed closer, its form flickering in and out of shape. One moment almost human, the next a warped, elongated nightmare wearing pieces of stolen identity. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed with a dull, ancient hunger. It crouched before me, bending too low, too smoothly, joints crackling like ice. Its hand hovered over my chest, and with every heartbeat, I felt the forest tugging at something deeper than flesh. A low groan rose from the earth. The stones vibrated. The circle felt like a living mouth around me, drawing breath, preparing to swallow. My copy, my perfect mirror, stood at the edge of the clearing, face blank, posture calm. It tilted its head, mimicking my terror like a cruel parody, and slowly, steadily, it stepped forward. "No!" I whispered, voice cracking. The forest swallowed the sound. The leader leaned close, and its face split into a wide, impossible grin. Dozens of human teeth, none matching, glimmered in the moonlight. "You cannot leave," it whispered, "but the world must not know what is kept here." My heart dropped. It wasn't trying to consume me, it was trying to replace me. The copy came closer, its movements smoother than anything human, each step synchronized with mine. My breathing, my heartbeat, my fear. It stopped inches away, looking down at me with my own eyes. The leader touched my forehead. A violent jolt tore through me, cold, electric, shredding through memory, thought, sense of self. I screamed, though the forest swallowed that too. Images flickered, the cabin, the rules, Savannah's warning, the red handprints, then deeper memories, my childhood, faces I loved, moments I'd forgotten. They unraveled like threads pulled from a tapestry. The copy inhaled sharply as though taking in everything being ripped from me. The forest leaned closer, waiting. But somewhere in the blur of terror, a spark flared, anger, defiance, instinct. I grabbed the nearest stone, sharp-edged and heavy, and slammed it into the roots holding me. Pain shot through my leg as one root snapped. The circle shrieked. The leader recoiled. The copy stumbled. That split second was enough. I tore free, sprinting through the gap, crashing into the forest with raw animal desperation. The trees screamed. The copies followed. Shadows chased my every step. I didn't look back. I broke through the tree line at dawn, lungs bleeding for air, vision blurred. My truck waited untouched. I drove until the forest disappeared entirely in the rearview mirror. I never returned. I changed my name. I avoided mirrors. And at night, sometimes I swear I see something wearing my face watching from the darkness.